So they were kind enough to come and share a little bit about why they like the church, why they love being able to come and be here. Maybe you share some of those same thoughts. Maybe you don't. That's okay. Maybe you don't normally come here, and that's okay too. Maybe you have some of those thoughts about your home church or where you normally go. You know, when we think about church, you know, a lot of times, you know, it comes to mind of, well, maybe you come for some of the same reasons that they do, maybe you don't. But why did you come? Why did you come today? When I think about having come today, a lot of part of what I think is, well, Danny had asked me to speak. If I showed up, there'd probably be a big gap. We'd sing a few songs and we'd go home, right? So maybe there's a little bit of this obligation. Maybe you have a responsibility. Maybe that's why you come. Maybe it's out of that sense of duty that's there. Maybe it's just because somebody invited you. Maybe it's because you've driven past the church and you see this big building, you're like, what in the world goes on in that place? Maybe you come faithfully every week because you want to be entertained and thought about, well, you know, maybe I should go and kind of do something there. Maybe I should be a part. But why did you come today? What was your motivation? Maybe it was out of the right reasons and the right motivation for coming. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, I'm super glad you're here. And I'm excited to spend this morning with you, talk about a few things. And so I'd like to actually talk about the church. I want to use this word, this Greek word, ekklesia, which is in the New Testament for church. When you look at this, the defining of that, normally it's used in this sense of assembly or group meeting. Sometimes it was even talked about as the group meeting at the synagogue. And as I was studying and preparing for this, it actually comes from a word called ek. So everybody say ek with me, ek. Yeah, it's kind of a funny word. It's kind of like you, ek. When you look at it, and this word actually means out. And I thought, well, how in the world do we go from out to church? And so I'm like, what in the world? How does this even connect? How are they even related to each other? And so when I was looking at it, it actually means like origin or start from and to go out from. When you look at, so when we think about this ek, it's denoting origin, the point whence motion or action proceeds, from, out, of place, time, or cause. So there's this idea that church maybe should be a place in which we can go out from. Maybe it's an idea that it's a place where we can come and ask questions. Be as Tina had so eloquently spoke about being yourself, not being perfect, maybe being vulnerable. My grandfather, who didn't go to church, didn't like Christians. Well, I don't know if didn't like Christians because I think he liked me and I'm a Christian. But, you know, he always would ask me these questions about it and things like that. And he said, you know, church is only for the weak. And at the time, as a young teenager, I thought to myself, no, it's not. It's not only, and he meant it derogatory as in weak-minded. Only those that didn't understand or didn't really fully grasp this concept. And so it was only for those that were weak and needed something. Today, I would look at him and say, Grandpa, you're right. Because sometimes life stinks. Sometimes life is fantastic. Sometimes it's amazing. And in all of these situations, I would like to have somebody who sits beside me, who walks along with me, that can mourn and weep and be a part of the hard stuff that really stinks. I also want somebody who can be right there with me to celebrate the good times. Whitney and I don't have any children, and her parents are really pushing us to try and have some in the near future at some point. And so at that, I want some people to celebrate with me if we have children, when we have kids. To hold them, to, I don't know, steal them from me so I don't have to watch them all the time, I guess. So. And we throw around this word church family a lot. If you look around this room, how well do you know the person that's sitting next to you? Maybe they're your spouse and you know them really, really well. Maybe they're a family member that you have, and so you've got intimate relationship. They've seen you ugly and in a bad mood. Maybe you look a little further across the room and you don't even know the person's name. Some of you might look at me and say, well, Lee, I don't even know your name except you just said it. And so looking at that, is it really a family? Do we really know each other? Are we really willing to share in life? How does that happen? Where does that happen? Is it in the four walls of the church? Is it here at the ecclesia as a building? What does it mean to be a church? What does it mean to have a place to denote being able to go out from? To be able to have a place that is maybe safety and shelter, family. If you've gone to church for very long at all, there's a scripture that talks about this in Hebrews chapter 10 that I'd like to kind of walk through a little bit today. Hebrews chapter 10 verse 25 says, not neglecting to meet together as the habit of some, but encouraging one another even more so as you see that day appearing, or the day of the Lord coming near. Forsake not the assembling of yourselves together is maybe a way that you've heard that put, if you've heard it in the King James Version. So when I think about this particular passage, okay, so I'm supposed to get together with these group of people, and a lot of times that happens on a Sunday like it does for us. Well, why should I come? What should that be a part of? Why do I even care? Obviously, you've come today for some reason, whether it's that positive side that maybe Shauna and Tina talked about, or maybe it's on the negative side where, it's obligation or duty, responsibility. Maybe it's a combination of both. Maybe at your church you go for a particular reason. Let's actually take a step back and let's look at the verses just before this. So let's start at verse 23, if you have a Bible or device, and we'll look at this together. So it says, let us continue to hold firmly to the hope that we confess without wavering. For the one who made the promise is faithful. And let us continue to consider how to motivate one another in order to love and good deeds. Then verse 25, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encourage one another even more as you say that the day of the Lord coming. So let's break this down a little bit. So the very first part of this says, let us continue to hold firmly to the hope that we confess without wavering. What is that hope that we have that's there? What hope do we have in this church? When I think about this, that we confess without wavering, some of us would say it's that hope of Christ. Some of us say it'd be heaven that's not too far away. Some of us would say, maybe it's bringing that heaven to earth, and that hope that we have not only after our death, after our passing, but also here while we're together. What is it that you hope for? As a young man, I have a lot of hopes and dreams. I have a lot of things that I look forward to, that I'm excited about. Is the ecclesia, is the church a part of that? When we think about this idea, we look through Scripture and we think about, okay, what is the church supposed to be? Well, the church is supposed to be the bride of Christ. What is the bride of Christ? Well, I've got a bride that I mentioned earlier, and she tried to run away at our wedding, and I caught her, thankfully. And so when we think about that, Are we running from God? Are we running from Christ? Are we running from the church because it's not perfect? When I think about this analogy, and a lot of times that's what it is, the best marriage that I know is my own. And so when I think about that, there are days where I love being married. Absolutely love it. Whitney's cooking the dinner, the house is clean, she goes to work, makes all the money, I have the day off, I relax my feet up, that kind of thing. Then there's the days where I don't like being married, where I work all day, I come home, I cook dinner, I clean the house, I water the lawn, and she's laughing because she knows that hardly ever happens. And so there are different times that are there. But really, when I think about it, we've been married almost 9 years. We're trying to catch up with the Lances. And so one day we'll be there. But the thing with that is, she sees me at my worst moments. But she still comes home. She still cooks dinner, cleans the house, does the stuff around there, hangs out with me, goes on dates. Thank you, whoever that was. I loved it. And I love being married. Fantastic. When we were engaged, hated it. Hated it. I loved being single, loved being married, didn't like being engaged. And so I've thought a lot about this hope of Christ coming. Are we currently engaged to Christ as the church? In the hope of Him coming? In the hope of that wedding day and that feast? Maybe so. And the worst part about being engaged was the almost but not yet. Do you feel that at all? Between you and God and Christ? The almost but not yet? I'm almost there. I'm almost to heaven. I'm almost where I can see God face to face. I'm almost to a place where all the tears will be wiped away and dried up. Where I'll be able to live in perfection. If there's any physical stuff going on, all that's taken care of. Any emotional things are going to be resolved and taken care of. Family members that have gone on and to be with the Lord, I'll get to see them again. Not to mention the pearly gates, streets of gold, big mansion that I'm supposed to have. Almost, not yet. Do you feel it? How do we bring a little bit of that glimpse of the heaven to earth? The Lord's Prayer, many of you know it, talks about exactly that. And sometimes I think the line, and I've talked about this before, between the profane and the prophetic, between the holy and the unclean, is very, very thin. The line between earth and heaven, I think, is very thin. How can we bring and pull heaven to earth? As the ecclesia, as the almost but not yet. Why did you come today? Why are you here? Are you holding to that hope that we have? Then let's take another look and look at this scripture again. Let us continue to hold firmly to the hope that we confess without wavering. For the one that has made the promise is faithful. I didn't even talk about Him being faithful to us when we're not faithful to Him. I digress. And let us continue to consider how to motivate one another in order to love and good deeds. Consider how to motivate. When I looked at this particular verse, in the Greek, it's proximus, which is to make, keen, urge, prick, provoke, irritate. So sometimes Whitney says that I'm promixing her, irritating, aggravating, stirring up, making keen, that I'm aware. It's the days when, if you went to college and you had a roommate, It's the roommate that gets up at 5 a.m. It's like singing, hey, today's the day of the Lord. Happy morning. And you're like, what are you doing? This idea of us motivating one another. When we come together, we should be motivated to spread that hope that we are so faithful in. That idea of that almost but not yet. All right, am I having an auditory hallucination? So let's hope that the trump of the Lord is louder than that, I guess, So yeah, a call to action. There we go. Hey, motivated, right? If you hear an alarm, you're going to go somewhere, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, this idea of being motivated towards. How often are you in a church where you're working with somebody and you're motivating them to do what's right for them, to do what's right for the church, to do what's right for the family? Or are you the one that comes in and loves to be entertained, just like you do with the TV? Click. What's the next channel? What's the next channel? Is Danny hitting the button today? Or do I switch it off? Are we motivating one another to action? Sometimes this friction happens as iron sharpens iron. Are you motivating? Are you sharpening? That's not always a good vibe, good feel every time. Sometimes it absolutely is and should be. Sometimes it might get a little hot, a little friction, because it's not perfect. Neither am I. Neither are you, I hate to tell you. But are we motivating one another? Danny talked a few weeks ago about the pearl. And that little irritant that gets in there that the clam starts to use to make that pearl. Sometimes that motivation is what we need to make that pearl. To bring that heaven to earth. To be that almost, but not yet. So why did you come today? Did you come to motivate somebody? To love and good deeds? So when you think about this verse, are we motivating people to love and good deeds? This can be so many things. I think that it's interesting because when you think about different denominations, a lot of times they focus on different things. And so some of the less evangelical Pentecostal churches, which is what we are considered through the Church of God, and if you have questions about that, I'd be happy to talk about it more. Just ask me. They tend to focus more on these idea of philanthropical activities. So we're going to sponsor a soup kitchen. We're going to go out and meet people and give them clothing. We're going to run a food pantry or a food drive. Then you have on the more evangelical side where they focus a little bit more on kind of the worship and experience of God and being able to have His presence kind of here in the place. Are either right or wrong? No. Do both of them have good and bad to them? Yes. Do I think we need both of them? Absolutely. So are you motivating someone to be more of that good love or love and good deeds? Or is it where somebody, you see in need, and instead of offering to help or do something for them, I'll pray for you? Or maybe it's that you're like me so many times and you're driving down the road and somebody calls you up and you are talking about stuff and you find out that there was a need that was out there that person had told you about and you just never thought to ever even meet it. Some people are just naturally gifted and good at this, I feel like. Why I don't think this way, I don't know. Some people, they just see needs everywhere, and they go and they meet them, and they are fantastic. I walk through life and it's like I've got blinders on and I never see it. May the Lord take the blinders off my eyes so I can see. If you're doing good works and you're motivating others to those, fantastic, keep it up. Some of you absolutely do this. You do it here at the church, you do it outside of these walls, and I see it in a lot of you in what you're doing, and I think it's fantastic. Motivate one another to good deeds and love. You know, there was a guitarist that came, talked to us, and was here for a while. He hadn't played with us in a while, but anyway, he's kind of a hippie a little bit, if you know who I'm talking about. And we'd always talk about kind of good vibes, you know, good vibes. You got to send out some good vibes. Sometimes that's all it needs. Sometimes it's a smile on a face. They can go such a long way. I remember a story when I was growing up, and I hadn't thought about telling this story. So there was a girl that was in my elementary school, and she was short, a little bit heavier set, and pretty poor, to put it very frankly and bluntly. So unfortunately, she was not very well liked at the school. And a lot of people picked on her, and her name was Rita. And so she was there, and I never was really nice to her, but I was never mean to her. I more or less was apathetic and just kind of arm's length a lot of times. And so she had written on her shoe in crayon, like she had put it like this, and it ended up being upside down when she walked. Why she did this, I still am clueless for, but it said, "I love Lee." So as a adolescent boy, what I would almost argue is the most unpopular girl in school had written "I love Lee" on her shoe, was the epitome and opposite exactly of what I wanted. I'm trying to think of even a modern analogy that would fit, but you probably all can relate to this. So then, how do you react to that? And so I'm like, I don't know. And so then I'm getting picked on because of her. Then come to find out, she ends up having to leave the school almost immediately, and I had no idea, because like I said, arm's length, not associated with her really at all, just not mean to her. So her and her mother ended up having to leave because of a violent home situation in the middle of the night. They had brought us in to the principal's office. I was in a real small school. We had probably 20 people, 15 people in the class, in my particular classroom. And the phone call that came in was to say goodbye and be kind of helpful for her, I think, and for us and so we're all talking and things like that, and they asked, is there anybody specific that you want to talk to on the phone? And she asked for me. And so at this point, I'm a little freaked out, like, what in the world is she going to tell me? What is going on? Oh boy, is she going to confess her undying love to me? So I'm like nervous, and so, she asked for that, and so we're all in the classroom, or in the office, all of us there. Palms are sweaty. I'm literally starting to like beat out and sweat and nervous, because this is totally the uncool thing to do, right? And so the rest of the class leaves, and we get on the phone, and we had a very, very short conversation that basically amounted to, thank you so much for being nice to me and not being mean. And she even recognized the writing on her shoe as probably not the best idea, and said that she didn't even write it on her shoe, that it was actually a brother of hers that had written it there, and she couldn't afford another pair of shoes, and so she had to wear those. And she just wanted to thank me for being nice to her. I'm a jerk. love and good deeds can be the smallest of things. Maybe I'm not rich. Maybe I'm not in a position of power or authority. But my love and good deeds can sometimes mean so much more than those that have it. How are you motivating one another? Are you motivated as you come in here? Are we being the ecclesia? Why did you come today? James says that faith without works is dead. Are you putting action to what you do? Are you motivating one another here or at your church family if you don't come here? Let's look back at that verse. Let us continue to hold firmly to the hope that we confess without wavering. For the one who made the promise is faithful. And let us continue to consider how to motivate one another in order to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another even more as you see that day of the Lord coming near. So even more as you see that day of the Lord coming near. When I think about this, some translations talk about the day of the Lord or the second coming of Christ. One day, we'll no longer be here like we are now, a new heaven and a new earth. This church will one day pass away. And as we're getting closer and closer to that day, I feel that our adversary is fighting harder and harder against us to be the ecclesia, to be the church. So when I read this passage, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together. Don't forget to get together with people who can motivate, who have the same hope as you, who are there to encourage and spur one another on to love and good deeds. Why would he say to do that even more so as we see that day appearing? I think personally there's probably a couple of reasons, and this is Gospel of Lee, so take it for what it's worth. As Satan is attacking us more and more, maybe I need a little bit more of that encouragement. Maybe I need that irritation, that poke, that prick to keep moving me forward. Maybe it's that we need to motivate one another so that way our conglomerate efforts can be more effective and efficient and reaching out to the world that has an adversary that's fighting so hard for their souls. Maybe, just maybe, we can make a larger difference together than we can separate. Why did you come today? Are you a part of the church? Are you being ecclesia? Maybe, maybe not. Even more so as you see that day approaching. So let's look back at this kind of idea of ecclesia and what it means. So again, when we think about the definition of the word, it's a religious congregation. Could be a Jewish synagogue or a Christian community of members on earth, or saints in heaven, or both. An assembly or a church. Coming from the idea of ek. This idea of origin or coming out from. Is this a place where people who have questions can come and ask? To come and be a part? We say it. Is it true? A friend of mine over lunch asked me, Lee, when was the last time you invited somebody to church? And I got to thinking about that. I was like, that's a great question. And then he asked me why not, and said that probably speaks volumes. My question to you today is, When did you invite somebody to your church? When did you invite somebody here? Why did you come today? Why are you here? Are you part of the ecclesia? Are you a part of the church? I hope that we can motivate one another, spurring us on to love and good deeds, even more so as we see that day approaching. Let's be the church today that this world needs. Appreciate your time this morning. I'd like to say a word of prayer, and then they're going to do a song, and I'd like for you to think about the words today and kind of where we are. Maybe let God speak to you just a moment, kind of in your own time of prayer. So would you bow with me, please? God, I thank you again for every person that's here. I thank you for the families they represent. God, I thank you for the many blessings that they are. Lord, I see the church around us in so many ways. For those that are so generous in their time, efforts, finances. God, I see people who love and care for one another in incredible ways. God, I also know that I see some growth for me and some of the things that you've called me to do. Lord, I pray that you would help me to take off the blinders where I need the blinders removed. God, help me to see the needs. Help me to spur others to motivation. God, help me to be the church, the ecclesia, with my brothers and sisters in Christ. Help us to move forward and to do what you've called us to do. Lord, we love and praise you and thank you. In Jesus' name.